And now we're going to get to a very interesting part of this series, and a part that I'm sure is going to be very controversial. And that's why we're going to approach this in a nuanced way. But I'm going to advocate at this point that you seriously consider, depending on the advice of your medical professionals, because I'm not a medical doctor. I've only dealt with the medical system all my life during depression and done what worked for me to get out of it, and it may not work the same for you. So you don't need to construe this as medical advice. Don't construe it as medical advice. Consult your medical professional, your family, those around you, and do what's right for you. And now I'm going to go ahead and say that for me, it was extremely important So which room are you going to use? Because I'm recording this. So you want to be in here, it's fine, but then I'll be in the other room.
I just wanted to check if you're here.
Okay. If you want to use the room, it's fine, but then I'll go somewhere else. So now I'm going to go ahead and say that for me, it was absolutely 100% essential to completely and totally, and yes, I tried to do this several times, but when it finally stuck for me, I did do it and stuck with it, is abruptly and finally, and with a firm conviction, leaving medication behind permanently. We don't want this medication there anymore. It's a crutch. If you're going to kill yourself and medication might help you, take the medication, but we are not going to get ourselves out of this depression if we stay on medication. And let me say that again, because I feel extremely strongly about this issue, and I don't appreciate what the well-intending medical community has got us essentially drugged on, is this medication. I spent 11 years on prescription antidepressants, anti-anxiety medication, even an antipsychotic, although for a relatively short time, and medications with sleep. And I realized that this would have kept on going forever. They would have kept putting me on endless amounts of different types of medications. I would have been on more sleep medications. And the more I would have been on them, the more I would have adjusted to them, and the more trouble I would have just falling asleep. And the real problem is that we do not have the opportunity to get ourselves actually out of depression if we are relying on antidepressants, because it changes our underlying chemistry. It changes how the mind is operating. And we can't get down there and work on what's actually happening with our naturally depressed mind and make those rewirings. We cannot rewire if our brain is operating on a different set of wires. If we're operating on wires that have been altered, or we've lifted into slightly different bands of brain frequencies, we're operating from different areas of our brain, the brain chemistry is different, then that's where we're living. That's where we're doing our work. We've adapted to that. And we're not going to be able to fix the brain as we are, the brain that we were born with, in order to get out of the depression. And I have bad news for you if you're on medication right now. It's kind of kept you comfortable. It kept me comfortable for years. I thought it was allowing me to function, which it was. I thought it was allowing me to go to work, get through college. But what it wasn't doing is giving me the opportunity to actually get out of depression. It was keeping me in a state of dependency. And it's not real happiness. You're not on a stable footing if you know that, missing a few pills, you're just going to sink back into the depression. That doesn't feel good. And it doesn't feel good if you know that your happiness isn't really real because it's based on taking medication. And you know that once the effects of that wear off and you adapt to it, which I always would, I would kind of stop taking medication for a couple of weeks, try to reset, go way down, then slowly be able to build back up. Eventually I would get on astronomically high doses. Eventually those wouldn't do anything anymore. So it really doesn't feel good to be in a position where I know that my whole life and how I feel is just blowing in the wind because it's resting on a bunch of medication. And what I want to tell you right now is that you have to ask yourself very seriously, is it time for you to get off medication? Is it your time? How many more years do you want to go being dependent on stuff without giving yourself the real chance to make progress and live a better life and be able to grow out of it? Because you're not going to be able to grow out of it if you continuously are on this medication. It's not going to happen. And if I had either not started the medication or stopped it after a year, so maybe I was going through that really hard time, maybe I used it to pull myself out of it and get through the end of high school, but that's where it ended after 6 months, then I would have had over 10 years to do real growth and real inner work, and I would have come out of this depression and perhaps be closer to where I am today 10 years sooner. This medication is doing us a disservice. This medication is brought to us by companies that are driven by profit, by companies that if somebody came to them and said, we have a cure for depression, if somebody came to them and said, we have a 1-pill cure and you can sell this 1 pill and people will be completely cured of depression, do you know what they would say? They would say, we're not interested. We don't want that pill. We don't want that pill getting on the market. We don't want anybody knowing about that pill because we want to keep you in a state of dependency, in a state of taking our medication for 11 years, paying money, going to doctor's visits, letting your insurance reimburse it, because guess what? Depression, anxiety, OCD, these are chronic conditions. They can keep selling these medications, keep us in a state of dependency, and it doesn't end for us. We're stuck in this for the rest of our lives, and maybe, just maybe, that's exactly what they want and exactly what the system is geared for. So I may not have a 1-pill, one-time cure for depression. What I do have is a surefire way for people whose depression is similar to how mine was and responds in a similar way to how mine was, which I think is similar to a lot of people who have depression. I don't think I'm so unusual. If anything, I'm unusual in the way that my depression was as bad as it was, that it was so entrenched as it was, that it was so tenacious and long-term as it was, that it left me without breaks, that it was a constant. And also it was tuned in with the other mental conditions that I had. So if anything, I'm not unusual, or if anything, I'm unusual in the case of how bad it was or how extreme it was. So I do believe that what I'm proposing here will work for many people. And hearing me say that I advocate for completely abandoning medication is probably not something that doctors and pharmaceutical companies and the healthcare system wants to hear. But I'm here to tell you that leaving medication behind is the only way you're going to give yourself an opportunity to actually heal yourself. Because the only way you can heal the underlying blockages is by experiencing those blockages. And you can't experience those blockages if you're not in the state that's receptive to feeling them, in the state that produced them, medication will block you from having that experience, from experience with them, because it changes your chemistry, it changes your wiring, it changes the hormones, and you're not actually going to be able to do this process in the most effective way if you're not off medication, or at least off of medication for enough time so it's out of your system and you can focus on the process. Now, we do have to do this smartly. I don't want anybody killing themselves because they got off of medication or did it in an inappropriate way. That's the last thing I want. I don't want anybody killing themselves, committing suicide because they went off of medication. And I know that's what's happened. It's happened with other people in the past. They may have tried medication or stopped, or they just started it. They wind up committing suicide, and then people are afraid of advocating for these things. They like to do the safer thing, and doctors just keep on prescribing. And that does not deter me from taking a stance that I believe is actually going to help people in a real way, and tell people that they need to get off medication if they want to make lasting changes. But let's be smart about this. Let me give you a little bit of background on my story. You can see how it wasn't so cut and dry, and it wasn't so easy. I took breaks from medication many times. I was hoping to wean myself off many times. And I succumbed to how horrible I felt when I was off of medication many times. And by many times, I was doing this every 3 months, every 6 months, for a period of 10 years. So many times. And if you get into a state where you feel so horrible without that medication that you really can't function anymore in a profound way that you're going to lose your family, lose your job, or kill yourself, then you can do what I did many times, which is get back on the medication. And then you can keep working at it until you get to a point in your mental state, or you get into a point in your life situation which supports being more aggressive. For me, the point I became more aggressive was when I moved from the East Coast in Boston to California. And I decided that my girlfriend, and later my wife, for that time period of my life, deserved better and didn't deserve to be on somebody who was on medication for depression. And maybe that's not exactly the right way to think about it, and maybe I should have been more forgiving of myself, and I do believe that looking back, but at that time, that's how I felt. And that was my thinking and my rationale of why I made a really, really hard push for a lot longer than I had done before to get off medication. I paid a very high price. I struggled increasingly at work in a situation that was already very tough. It was extremely competitive. It was a new city. I was moving around. I was unsettled geographically. And this greatly exacerbated it. And for all the other reasons, as well as likely this, I wound up losing that job, and that made things even worse. But I had gone for a significant amount of time off of the medication. And after losing my job, I still persisted. And in that space, I hit bottom. I had lost my job. Because of that, the relationship wasn't going that well, and that was important to me. Instead of going back on medication. I saw a psychologist 3 times a week. She helped as much as she could. I was still depressed. And then I went to India. And the one part of the story I have to fill in is that I have an extremely long history of meditation, of yoga. And I've been doing all kinds of yoga just before this to try to assuage my depression, allow me to get through work one day at a time. And I had gone to so many different yoga classes and so many types. And that sets the background for when I went to India. I had heard that yoga originated in India, and that gave me the motivation to ask the question at this wedding, where can I go to learn about yoga in your country, in India? They pointed me to a town called Rishikesh, which I knew nothing about at that time, but is a very old place, has an ancient tradition of yoga, and where there are still some ashrams today, and where yogis still congregate to this day. And I wound up in Rishikesh, India. What's interesting for our story and how it relates to leaving medication is I received an energy transmission from a yogi that I was blessed to encounter at that precise time. And him, Eric Beckwith, actually an American of all people, meaning an American from Florida, in the middle of India, when I'm trying to learn about American yoga, I was astonished. He was there in white robes and silence, having been into his spiritual path and taken initiations from gurus in India over several years. I happened to encounter him, an American, in a cafeteria filled with Indians. I was hearing nothing but Hindi there, which I didn't understand whatsoever. And I saw this white man, about my age even at that time. I was 31. And he was looking down. He wasn't interacting with anyone. And I began to suspect that he might be in silence. He might not be talking to anyone, which it turned out was true. He had been in silence, and he was intending to keep that silence and not have any verbal interaction whatsoever. He was simply taking his food, eating by himself. Because of my curiosity about yoga, all the classes I had been to, and so far in India, hadn't found what I was looking for, despite some searching in this extraordinary town of Rishikesh, I felt really compelled at that time to approach him and to find out more.